I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
The seat taken.
We made it to 20. Kieran.
Yeah, happy 20. We can
20.
almost drink. We're driving sober, and we can almost drive to the bar and drink once we get to next week.
Yeah, next episode I can finally talk about drinking. It's going to be really exciting.
And to think at 20, we're well into getting fantastic guests.
Oh, fantastic guest. Yeah,
I mean, I feel like once you're past a decade, people really start saying yes to interviews.
That's true. When they go to that podcast page and they see all those 5-star reviews and that 1 4-star review.
Who we still don't know. But please reach out. We want to respond.
Yeah, we want to hear what we didn't please, how we didn't please you, and we'll get you that extra star.
I'm pretty used to that conversation. But Ryan, this week we have yet another superstar interview.
Yeah, we're going to talk to Matt Long, who has been a travel photographer and blogger covering travel for about a decade now. So we're going to find out how you get such a cool job and some of the great places that he's been. So good conversation. Excited to share it with you.
A very jealousy-inducing conversation.
Yeah, when I ask him how many countries he's been to and he tells me you can't see the look of shock on my face, but it was envy and I really felt envious and jealous. And I don't feel that all the time, so...
Do you remember how much? How many?
I do, but I don't want to give it away. But
okay.
It's a
so
lot.
You'll have to tune in.
Yeah, it's you and I combined, probably not even close.
Yeah.
It's like Hillary Clinton territory.
What? Oh man. How does he finance it? Do you talk about that?
We talk a bit about that. Yeah, I mean, he goes on a lot of trips that are sponsored by various groups, travel agencies, travel tourism boards for countries and states. So. It's a whole thing. It's a whole world out there. There's conferences that I guess you and I should go to since we are also travel media folks.
Travel influencers.
Yeah.
Well, listen, if any of those sponsors want to get in touch, the email is outofofficepodcast@gmail.com. And we're waiting.
And speaking of email, we got a piece of listener mail.
Yes, we put out the bat signal on I think our last episode where we said we want to hear your travel and overseas questions.
Your non-office related
Exactly.
questions.
Anything that doesn't have to do with how to fix the printer and why your cubicle wall is the color it is. Any we don't want to talk about depressing office decor.
No, or the NBC BBC comedy The Office, but more focused on travel.
Though we did talk about that a lot but we actually have our first real listener question, a listener who actually listens to this podcast
and intended to email us.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I think this person was picking up on the fact that we talk about food a lot.
Right. We both obviously love food.
And so this is from a listener named Brendan. I'm told that it is good etiquette not to use last names on podcasts, so I won't reveal who this Brendan is.
Okay. Yeah, we shouldn't. Unless they're a public figure, we can't out them.
And his question is American cheese available in other countries besides America?
And by this, he doesn't mean like cheese manufactured in America necessarily. He means processed.
Yeah, the type of American cheese. Right. And you mentioned processed, and that is an important part of this mystery.
It is. So I have to confess, when I'm overseas, I'm not generally going like, can I get a grilled cheese sandwich with the worst kind of cheese? Like,
right, yeah.
So I don't miss American cheese. I've never thought about this question before.
Yeah.
Like, I've eaten at McDonald's pretty much everywhere that I've ever been. So,
and it is very available there. That processed American cheese is available at all the McDonald's.
Yeah, when you're in Russia and you've had nothing but chicken Kiev for 2 weeks, having a burger and having that that American cheese flavor, that is something to look forward to.
Something to treasure. Yeah.
Something to treasure, exactly. Yeah.
But I understand that after doing a little research, American cheese is sometimes not. It is sold, but it's not called American cheese. It's called processed cheese.
Processed cheese, but it's sold by some of the big processed cheese vendors. Like you would get Kraft processed singles.
Right. So you're talking about the sort of orange cheese that comes between the plastic
Yeah.
that's not even appetizing when it's sold in America.
Is it government cheese? Is that also the same thing, or is it that's
No, I
different?
think I mean I think government cheese tastes very similar, but I
Yeah.
think there is a slight difference. That has to be owned and then given by the government.
Right.
Thus,
Right.
government cheese.
Well, one day I'm going to understand the audience for American cheese because, from what I can tell in the cheese world, you can still get it's the same price to get some cheddar or something that has a little flavor, a little,
Yeah,
bite
I
to it.
mean, what from what I was reading online, there were reports from folks who said, "I've gotten American cheese in Canada, in Scotland, in Japan," but often they were referring to that mass-produced cheese. I don't think that you can get sort of that Boar's Head deli version of what we think of as American cheese.
Okay, what people don't think of Boar's Head Deli American cheese. People think American cheese, and all of our listeners are going to agree with me on this. They think Kraft singles. That's what they think. They're not thinking like going to the deli and getting like
Well,
sliced
okay. All
American
right. Well,
cheese.
listen, the craft singles are available. I mean, that is the answer then.
Yeah.
So if you are overseas and you're feeling homesick and you got a hankering for cheese, overseas and a hankering for cheese,
Right.
that's craft. You can take that. And so the answer is yes, you can get that version. But honestly, I think the view of this podcast is there's a lot better cheeses when you're overseas. So could you have some of those?
Yeah, have some of those. And it was funny in researching the answer to this question, we read that in 2014 a lot of European countries got angry at American cheese manufacturers for using terms to describe their cheeses that they didn't think were actually American type cheeses, right? Like
Right.
Parmesan.
Yeah, so like
Yeah.
Parmesan, feta, cheddar, these are there are protestations from overseas when American cheese tries to claim credit
Right.
for any of those because it is so unrecognizable as cheese to so many.
Right, and it's like you can't grow champagne grapes in California. Maybe you shouldn't be able to make certain kind of cheeses officially. These kind of cheeses in Wisconsin, which
I
makes
mean,
great cheese, by the way.
absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
think we can agree that American cheddar is the best cheddar.
Yeah, I love American cheddar cheese. Cheddar
Have you
cheese,
been to
by the way.
Wisconsin?
I have been to Wisconsin. I have. I've been to Milwaukee,
Ooh.
Wisconsin. I've been to Madison, which is a beautiful place, and I've had cheese curds, which is essentially just big hunks of cheese that they eat at meals.
So good, so squeaky.
So squeaky.
I love a cheese curd. Well, there is our first real listener mail. Listener Brendan, thank you for getting in contact. I hope that we satisfied your query. And to all the other listeners out there, please send us your queries. Anything to do with travel, overseas, wanderlust, we are here to search out the answer. And Ryan, the email is?
outofofficepod@gmail.com.
outofofficepod@gmail.com. Maybe we'll choose to put you on air. And with that, Ryan, I think it's time to get to the interview.
Yeah, let's talk to Matt Long. Let's take off.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
I am here with Matt Long, who is an award-winning travel writer and photographer who has been covering all sorts of travel. And he is his website is landlopers.com. And thank you so much for joining us, Matt.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, how do you get such a cool job? How do you become a travel writer and photographer?
Through sheer will of force of will. Yeah, so for a long time, I was working in a career that really wasn't a good fit for me. It's not what I had ever intended to do with my life, but like so many other people, you get into a situation that's comfortable and you've got salary and healthcare and great things like that. And even though it wasn't, what you dreamt of doing as a young kid, you kind of just stick with it because it's easier than not. And then about 10 years ago, I actually went on a fairly extraordinary trip down to the Galapagos. And that really kind of it opened my eyes to what I think I had been missing and made me remember why I love travel so much. So I got back and started a blog. I didn't really know what a blog was at the time, but I spent a rainy 3-day weekend in March. And by that Monday, I had my first blog post up. And then I was in a position about 7 years ago to leave that formerly soul-sucking full-time job and start doing this full-time.
And so, how did you pivot to how did you grow like a travel audience? How did you get folks to start sort of following along with your adventures and recommendations?
If I knew that, I'd be selling an online course. But it was 9 years ago, first of all, so there were far fewer people. There were still quite a few. Everyone thinks there was just 3 or 4 people. No, there were hundreds of people trying to do this. It's just they're not all around currently. But still, there weren't thousands, just hundreds. And so that one advantage. I also think I had a unique voice. I had not sold my house, car, left significant other, and put on a backpack to travel the world, which was pretty much what everyone else had done. And so I wrote about, and still do to this day, more manageable travel. Even though I could theoretically travel every day of the year, I don't, because I do have a home and significant other and dogs and life I enjoy here in DC. And so, like many other people, my trips tend to be between 5 to 10 days in length. Granted, I go on 15 of them a year, but I'm still able to write from a point of view that I think most people can relate to, which is oddly missing in the travel blogosphere.
So you're not like a digital nomad on an indefinite trip.
Well, I'm not on an indefinite trip. No, I am a digital nomad, and all that really means is that it's really location independent. So I could work on a beach in Tahiti if I had the proper Wi-Fi, and I have.
So what was your first trip that you took when you launched this blog? What was like the sort of inaugural trip?
Well, this really started as an outlet for me because I realized that I look at travel and the world in a way that was different from other people. Even though I had a traditional job and my partner had a traditional job, we still traveled as often as we could, and so travel planning was still something I always enjoyed. So those first couple of years, I was still working, and so our trips were normal vacation-y destinations. A big one, though, for us was the first time we went to Thailand. It was my first time in a kind of developing nation, and it was alarming at first, but then I very quickly grew to love it, and since I've been back, I think 2 additional times.
Where did you go in Thailand? I've done Bangkok and Pattaya.
Okay.
And Pattaya is really fun 'cause it's got like when I went, it had like a sort of crazy gay party scene, which was super fun. But Bangkok I mean, it's a city you see a lot of like poverty in a way that you don't always see when you're on a when you're traveling for pleasure. Did you find that as well?
Absolutely. And, it was one of the first times I also saw how stark those differences can be. And so in a lot of nations in the developing world, you see very, very wealthy people literally alongside the poorest of the poor. And I definitely saw that in Bangkok. And if you go down the Shelf Raya on a boat tour or just taking the ferry, you'll see that. You'll see ridiculously expensive homes next to shacks. And it is eye opening. But to answer your question, Bangkok, down in Koh Samui, and then since then back to Bangkok a couple more times, and most recently Chiang Mai.
And can you just what is something you look for when you're traveling? What is it that you really enjoy doing?
I love going to places I've never been before, and for me, that's really kind of the thrill. The adventure is seeing something for the first time. There's nothing like it. It's an adrenaline rush. It really is as you start to learn about a new destination. Other than that, it really I alternate. I alternate between really enjoying spending time in cities, but every time I've been forced out into nature, I've enjoyed it. Much to my chagrin. I'm not a camper, and I've tried, and it has not gone well.
Do you combine those sort of city and then like maybe like a beach rural part, like when you say you went to Bangkok and then you went down to a beach? Is that sort of how you try to divide your trips out? Or
It depends. I'm a very restless OCD kind of personality, so I like looking at beaches. I'm not really one to sit on one for more than 10 or 15 minutes, but absolutely I combine it with more natural escapes. So 3 or 4 years ago, I think I was in Vienna. It's a good example. And then the second half of the trip, we were down in the Wachau Valley. So it was a nice mix of the wine region along with the city and just completely different uh, pace of life.
now, do you post in real time from the road, or do you have your vacation and then go back and sit and think, and then write something?
Well, the narrative posts take time because each of my posts. Nowadays, I'm doing 3 days a week. I was doing 5 days a week for 8 years, but it eventually got to be too much for me. And each one is between 1 and 2,000 words. So
Okay.
there's just absolutely no time that I'd be able to do that on the road, and I wouldn't want to. Not only because it takes far too long, and I'm not usually traveling for that long, but I also think it takes time to really digest a travel experience and to think about it. On Monday, for example, yesterday, I published a post about India with the outset that this is almost a year later, and I really want to reflect again and compare and contrast those initial thoughts and see what I think now. Because when you're in the moment, everything is great. This is the best place I've ever been. I don't think those are very realistic posts. What I will do while I'm in country is post social media a lot, and maybe a photo of the day on my website.
And have you found like the rise of Instagram has made that easier? I mean, before when you were just blogging, it's harder to find an audience, and then you've got so many people. I think that go to Instagram to find beautiful images and to feel like they've been traveling.
Absolutely. And Instagram, I used to enjoy a lot more than I do now, to be honest. Now it's just incredibly stressful for me, but I do enjoy it in that it allows me to communicate in a way I don't anywhere else. And so, not only through imagery, but then I also do long form Instagram posts, which are essentially very small blog posts. They're 200 or 300 words in length. And so it's really for me an opportunity to share something completely different that you won't see from me anywhere else. And Instagram Stories takes that even further, which I love, because when I'm traveling, I share almost everything. And so you see me cranky because of an airport delay or something like that, and it really puts a real face to the experience.
Yeah, I love your Instagram because it is so focused on all the places that you're going and experiencing without like having to always put your head in. Here's me in front of the Eiffel Tower. Here's me in front of something great. You're able to step back and actually just sort of say here's some of the beautiful places that I've been.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I get very quickly annoyed at people who make it all about themselves because it should not be about that, but that's a separate podcast.
So, what are some of the most photographic places that you've been that you've just like, oh wow, this is going to be, this is not only is it stunning, but it's something that I feel like I can capture some of the beauty of.
Well, and that's the key, eh? So, I've been in plenty of situations that, I was stunned by the beauty, and I look at my photos and they're all gray or washed out and just terrible because the lighting just happened to be slightly off. But some places where I've been, besides the obvious, I think people understand that if you go to Paris the right season, it'll be a beautiful photo. But uh, I was in Kyrgyzstan 2 years ago, along with half the blogging community. Uh, and I was shocked. I was shocked by just how stunningly gorgeous it was. And that did translate, I think, very well to the photos that came afterwards. And a lot of Australia. It sounds silly because, I mean, we all realize Australia is beautiful, but it can be hard to capture that natural beauty. But I think that's come across very well in my photos as well.
And do you travel with a obviously like a professional camera, or what is your sort of divide between, okay, I'm going to go out and take a lot of pictures right now, or I'm going to just have my phone and then snap something occasionally?
Well, it's changed over the years as the phones have gotten better, to be honest. But I always take my DSLR, Nikon D5100, and my iPhone, which is the
Right.
latest, greatest. Uh, and I usually shoot the same picture twice so I can have them on both devices, frankly, because it's easier in the moment for me to share from the phone rather than try to figure out for my camera and go from there. But 9 times out of 10, I'm using those iPhone images. Because you have the same resolution as you do on the DSLR. And I mean, there's many things, frankly, you can't do on the iPhone that you need the DSLR for. But if I'm just going around a city for the day, I don't feel guilty just having my phone because the quality can be so very high.
Have you ever tried like a external lens or something on your iPhone?
Yeah, not for the latest one, but for a previous generation uh, it, to mixed results. To be honest, it really depends on which one and how it attaches. They have these clip ones which are just terrible. They're terrible because they keep sliding. I had a screw-on one that worked fine, but I have a case, and you can't use it with the case, and so you kept having to take the case off, and there were more trouble than they were worth.
Gotcha. I've always wondered that. So, any places like you just mentioned, other places that you've been where you've been surprised by what you found that's sort of off the beaten path? Because so often we tell people to go to Paris or go to London or go to Barcelona. These cities are beautiful, but what else has surprised you? I think that's something our listeners would be interested in.
Well, there's a couple ways to think about that. So, mentioning the cities that you just talked about, there are some amazing places not very far away from all those cities, be it Paris, Barcelona, or Venice. In Italy, you've got Emilia-Romagna. In Barcelona, you have Costa Brava. And all of France, frankly, it's amazing. And so when we're talking about issues like over tourism, you know, I don't think it's reasonable to expect a first-time traveler to not go to Venice or Barcelona because
Sure.
they're amazing. But then to very quickly also discover that the surrounding regions are truly exceptional. They really are, be it for food, culture, you name it. They're absolutely out of this world. It just takes thinking a little bit outside the box and to maybe do a little bit more research because they don't always pop up, you know, on the top 10 things to do in Barcelona books that you buy. Other than that, I have been pleasantly surprised by a number of places. China, I think, really surprised me. I've been only twice, and it's an enormous country that deserves so much more than I think collective week I've given it. But I've been to a few different, very divergent areas of the country, and it's shocking size and the many cultures there, and how much I enjoyed it. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much. I think we here in the U.S. maybe have a slightly skewed image of what China is like, especially modern Chinese culture. And it's nothing like I thought. You know, I was imagining 1982 Moscow. You know, it's not. It's a you know, it's they have hipsters too. They've got, you know, cat cafes. You know, it's as quirky and as funky as some other places.
And can you explain like maybe just give us an idea like what kind of project or campaign like something recently that you've done?
Sure. Well, I do work on a lot. You know, it's a big part of my work and business. But uh, last fall, I was back in Northern Ireland in the UK at a conference called Social Travel Summit, and that's it's mostly European based, but it's yet another travel blogger conference. But this one's a little bit different in that they limit the attendees to about 50 and the corporate participants to about 50. So it feels more like a think tank, and everyone there has been writing for 5 or 6 years. So, you know, you won't have topics on what is Instagram. Instead, you'll have fairly high level discussions on everything from social media to operating your blog as a business. But all of that was underwritten by Visit Britain. And so, you know, we also had the opportunity to get out into the rest of the country and spend a couple days exploring.
Do you have some favorite travel writers?
I do. Bill Bryson is always one of my top favorites. I like him a lot. He's quirky and funny and interesting. Yeah, if you go way back in time, you know, the guy that really inspired, I think, well, a lot of my wanderlust was James Michener. I read his book Hawaii when I was probably way too young to be reading this 1,000-page book, but it really influenced my life. And yeah, I finally went to the South Pacific a couple of years ago, and that was a culmination of 40 years of pining for that. You know, looking today, there are a number of great writers, both online and not. If you're talking about someone like Rick Steves, who changed the way that we look at travel guides, but you have a lot more one-off freelance writers out there who are doing good work because that's really where travel writing has gone. You know, magazines and newspapers really don't employ very many permanent staff reporters anymore. Some do, but not very many. And so it's finding a freelancer that you like and trying to follow them as much as you can.
Have you considered writing sort of a like a long form nonfiction book about your travels?
No, not really. You know, for a variety of reasons. I'm not sure. Not at the moment. How's that?
So, do you have you traveled a lot domestically?
I've tried to increase that in recent years. About 4 or 5 years ago, I realized I'd been to, at that time, maybe 70 countries, and I had seen precious little of my own. So I have been trying here and there to increase that, but I had the opportunity last year to fulfill what was really I wouldn't say lifelong dream, but something I've been really wanting to do for a long time, which is to drive the entirety of Route 66, the true Mother Road from Chicago to Santa Monica. And I tackled that with a friend of mine who's also a travel blogger and mostly a YouTuber now, Brendan Vanson. And he and I spent 2 weeks driving across the country, which was a truly extraordinary experience in every way.
And did you plan it out, or did you sort of,
Oh,
or
yes.
when you so you knew where you were going when you in the morning when you set out?
I planned everything out. So
Right.
yes, for this, I had buckets of notes because Route 66 doesn't exist anymore, right?
Right.
So it was decommissioned in, I think, 1983. And so you can't even technically drive the entire, but there are some good guides out there, and one in particular called I think it's called the Easy Guide to Route 66, and it's painstaking turn by turn navigation from right in front of the Art Institute of Chicago to the pier in Santa Monica, 2,300 miles. Uh, and you can't use GPS because GPS wants to take you the
Right.
fastest way possible. So it has to be using this guide and maps and in doing it turn by turn. I think over 2,300 miles, we stayed straight without turning, the longest for maybe 15 miles. So that gives you an idea of what our days were like. It was just constant turn left here, turn right there, turn left here, turn right there, to try to stay on as much of the real Route 66 as we could.
And are there still signs and stuff for Route 66 that people have kept? Are there cafes? I mean, there must be a lot of memorabilia when you get out there in the real Midwest.
There is, and it's big. I wouldn't call it big business, but it's business, and it is tourism, and mostly from overseas in Europe and whatnot. They really do see it as the quintessential American experience, which I think it is. They're influenced by movies like Cars most recently. And so, yeah, there are a ton of businesses out there who cater to through drivers, as we're called. And some states have also marked it. There cannot be anything official for Route 66 because it is no longer an official road. So, but some states have put up what are essentially historical placards along the way that mark it. And some states have definitely done better than others. Illinois does a great job. Missouri does a great job. I don't think Texas did a great job. New Mexico, I don't think did a great job. So
I know that I've been on sections of Route 66 in my life, but I've never actually done the whole thing. Although I grew up in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and in this city called Ocean City,
Mhm.
and Route 50 either begins or ends. It depends how you look at it. Um, on the East Coast, and then goes all the way across the country to Sacramento. So there's a sign in Ocean City that says, Sacramento, 2,475 miles away or whatever. And then when I finally got to Sacramento in my early 20s, I got a picture in front of the sign that says Ocean City, Maryland, with the same amount away. So I think like Route 50, that goes straight through. It's probably it's not as epic a drive, but I think it would be interesting to do at some
Well,
point.
actually, it's funny you said that. I started researching that a few weeks ago, actually, because I live not far from the Eastern Shore myself. I live in Maryland, and it's known as the loneliest road. And so I thought it would be fascinating to drive that across the country for similar reasons to Route 66, just because it's an epic cross-country drive.
Yeah, I did the Ocean City, Maryland to Salisbury, Maryland drive many times as a teenager, and that can be very lonely. So I can only imagine. I've gotten to drive around the country a bit when I was younger. I was on the Howard Dean campaign,
Mhm.
and we drove to something like 26 states in 4 months. So I got to go all sorts of places that I would never have typically planned if I was traveling. Places like Auburn, Alabama, which really surprised me. It was lovely, beautiful. Oxford, Mississippi. Um, you know, had Old Miss is this really kind of beautiful old campus. Really interesting places out there that I feel like it's really kind of people don't usually get out there. And I sort of missed my chance to do the cross country road trip when I was a teenager. But maybe that Route 50 trip is something I should think about doing.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a lot of fun.
Were there any highlights of towns that you kind of came across when you were doing your trip that surprised you or interesting?
Well, I think you're exactly right when you say there's a lot of small to medium-sized towns out there that don't get any attention. Forget not much attention. They don't get any attention,
Right.
And yet people live there, and they enjoy living there. They live there for a reason. Carthage, Missouri, was a great exemplar of that, in that it has this beautiful early 20th century courthouse. And it's enormous because for a brief 30 years, they apparently were one of the world's largest suppliers of some mineral. And so they had a ton of wealthy people for 30 years, and they built a lot of stuff around town. And it's gorgeous. It's as beautiful as any European city hall out there. But I had never heard of Carthage, Missouri. And there's a lot of small little towns like that across the country, and chatting with people. And, that's the real highlight of doing your trip like Route 66, is really getting to know the folks who live along it and are happy to.
And I feel like some of those towns are used to what did you call through riders?
Through drivers.
Through drivers. Yeah, I guess some of those towns are used to having through drivers come through, so that's something they look forward to and find interesting.
Absolutely. And for some small businesses, it's their only income. And so they really do rely on it very heavily.
Do you know how many countries that you've been to?
About 95.
95. That's fantastic. How do you keep track? By memory? Do you have an app?
No. Once in a while, I'll download the list and go through it
Right.
and check off and tally it up that way. But yeah, it's between 90 and 95. It really depends how you count them, to be honest.
Right.
And different people count them in different ways.
Sure. And are there countries that you want to go to, but you don't feel like now is the time to do it?
That's a good question. Because in general, I'm very happy to go almost anywhere where I haven't been before. But you're right. There are some places right now I'm not keen on going to for a number of reasons. I think Russia is actually on that list.
Yeah, I got to do Russia in 2003, and it was fascinating. And it was obviously a different time in Russia right now. So I would love to go back, but again, I don't know that this is the time to do it.
And that's a personal decision. Travel is an intensely personal process, and I would love to see those beautiful cities, and I have no doubt that they're amazing. But I think it's definitely it's a place that needs to wait. And I'm not one of those people that seeks out war torn areas. There are sadly bloggers who do that. I think it's somewhat. I think it's irresponsible, but some do that. I do not. So I don't need to go to Afghanistan at the moment.
I had my good friend and my roommate actually went to Iraq not too long ago to go to a film festival, and he was in the northern part of Iraq, the Kurdistan,
Oh,
and he said it was really lovely. But it did sound like a pretty big adventure.
yeah, and no offense to him, obviously, but and I'm sure it is. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big world. There's a lot of it I haven't seen, and so before I go to some of these other places, I'm happy to go to the new to me places.
What are your future travel plans?
Still up in the air a little bit. I know there are some places I tend to go to every year. I tend to go back to Germany and Ireland at least once a year. We're doing something big. My partner has a milestone birthday coming up in April, so we're actually going to Copenhagen and then doing. Uh, I wouldn't call it a cruise. It's kind of on like a really fancy ferry, but we're on it for a week. It goes to Faroe Islands and then Iceland, which is one of my favorite countries, and so we'll be spending a week in the North Atlantic, which I'm very excited about.
That's lovely. And Copenhagen is such a great town.
I've never been. Isn't that weird?
Well, you'll have
It's
you,
weird.
yeah. I mean, you've been a lot of places. So
I've flown out of the airport, and we drove from Malmo there, but I have not spent any time there. So I'm looking forward to it.
yeah, I've done Malmo, but only because I flew out of the airport there.
Yeah, see?
So it's the opposite of your travel.
So no, it should be nice.
Now, are you one of those people if you're going to a city for a totally non-tourist or travel reason, like to visit a family member or for some very specific work function, that you will make a point to go to whatever the tourist destination in that town is?
Yes, because I'm obsessed with it. So
Yeah.
so when I had a traditional 9 to 5 job, I thankfully got to go to a number of conferences around the U.S. and I would always somehow squeeze in time to go see something. I remember I was in Kansas City, and they have one of the great museums in the world that doesn't get any recognition, which is the National World War I Museum, and it's actually designed by the same individual who designed the Holocaust Museum here in D.C. And it's an exceptionally well curated museum. And so I spent an afternoon doing that after meetings one day, and it was a fabulous way to spend some time.
Yeah, I do very similar things. Like when I was just in a conference in Detroit, and I made a point to get a flight late that next day, so I'd have time to go check out the Detroit Institute of Art, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think making use of it's something we talk about a lot on this podcast. Making use of business trips or family trips to see something interesting. A lot of towns just have some. There's always something sort of like magical and important and often beautiful that you've never even heard of because it's in this town that like you said doesn't get a lot of attention. So I think that like one of the best things that travel journalists and bloggers and photographers can do is to stop sending everyone to Venice and really try to highlight. Like you were talking about what was the term you used? Over travel,
Over tourism, yeah.
over tourism. Yeah. So I've been reading a lot about this specifically around places like Atlanta. Not Atlanta. Sorry.
I don't think they're suffering from that. Maybe on Sunday, last Sunday, but I don't think that's a current issue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Specifically in places like Venice, where there's just enormous amounts of tourists. So, as much as folks can, like you said, you go to Venice, go to Paris, but then travel around and just see some of these smaller towns. There's really a lot to explore.
Well, Atlanta is the Venice of the U.S., so it's an easy mistake.
That is most definitely not true. Have you done Mexico City yet?
No, and I know everyone, and I've listened to your podcast, so I know that you're.
I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed.
You're an advocate.
Yeah.
I'd like to. For as enormous as Mexico is, I've gone to very few places, and they're very touristy. And I was there very briefly, and none of that is good. It's not a good combo. I know that, but I've enjoyed the places I've gone. It's just no, Mexico City. I haven't heard anything negative about.
Well, I won't. I'll spare you any recommendations since folks can just go back a couple episodes and hear me go on and on about that. But yeah, that's a city that when you grow up and you're sort of Irish Catholic kid from Maryland, you hear a lot about Ireland and about England, and so I was sort of obsessed with Europe when I was a kid. So it's been one of the great pleasures of mine, like late 20s, or now to mid 30s, getting to explore. South of us, and there's just so much that Bogota is beautiful,
Yes.
and Costa Rica, I mean, is just so stunning, especially when around the we took a truck and just sort of got driven all around, and it's just so beautiful out there. So I do feel like that there's a lot close to us that we just don't see often.
Yeah, and the flight options actually down to Central and South America are very good. At least they are from the East Coast, and I assume from many other parts of the country. They either require no connection or just one.
Definitely. Well, look, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us. Really interesting. I'm so jealous of all the countries that you've gotten to go to. Although I think you're going to enjoy Copenhagen. And we're going to link to your website, Landlopers, and your Instagram in the show notes so folks can find you. And I heard a rumor you might be launching a podcast soon.
Yeah, I was looking at hopefully getting up next week, but I'm still learning the technical side, so we'll see. I've actually been working on that for a lot of today. But yeah, I'm excited. It should be a lot of fun. I think it'd be a good new creative outlet for me.
Cool. Well, folks should definitely check that out. And thank you so much for joining us out of office.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much to Matt Long for joining us. And I think it's time right now for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan. Well, the last stop is, for our new listeners, the final segment of the show where you and I talk about what we're reading or eating or watching or smelling. We've never actually done a smelling one, but I dream that someday we will. Something that keeps the spirit of travel alive within us during our workaday lives, feeding that spirit of wanderlust. Boy, I mean, the interview alone that we just heard absolutely checks that box. I feel like for our listeners, that's their last stop this week.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine over 90 countries?
No, I mean, it's like Hillary Clinton territory.
It is. It is totally Hillary Clinton territory. I'm incredibly jealous. And, when you ask somebody a question like, how many countries have they been to? And they have to pause and do high level math.
Yeah.
The answer is going to be good.
Yeah. 90 is real high level math.
When it comes to countries. And then he also said, he also makes this, he's like, well, it depends on, he goes, when he's thinking about his countries, he's like, oh, well, some of them have changed. So he's been to countries that have
that are no longer countries.
No longer countries. Yeah.
I mean, I think what I admire most is that he spends real time in those countries. He's not somebody who's just checking the box, which is what many travelers are trying to do, just to say they've been to 90.
Yeah, and he talks about, getting off the beaten path. So, obviously spend time in Paris, but then all the little cities around, really go out there and explore. And I think that you and I agree that you can find some really magical, less traveled places when you kind of do that.
100%. Yeah. It was great. And thank you so much to Matt.
Yes. Thank you, Matt. And we'll link to all of his social channels, like I said, in the show notes.
So, Ryan, what is your last stop this week? You're much more pedestrian,
Yes.
non-90 country last
Yes.
stop.
So my last stop this week will be my last time to go to MoMA, the New York Museum of Modern Art.
Oh, are you dying?
No,
Or
it is. They are closing down for several months over the course of the summer. June 15th is their last day to go before they close down for several months for their big renovations. So
it's unbelievable. I
I
mean,
know.
these have to be the primary foot traffic months for them.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It goes to show how much they think this renovation is going to really improve the experience and the ability to show a lot more art there.
It's funny too because you think of it as quite an up-to-date, beautiful museum.
I remember when the what I would call the new MoMA, the
Yeah.
one not in Queens, opened. So that is, yeah. So in my New York City life, that's been a big event, along with the opening of the Whitney. Those are the two big museum openings that I can even think of.
Yeah, it's very sad, the idea that you won't be able to pop in there for at least a few months. Do you know how long it's intended to go?
Until October,
Wow.
when it reopens.
I'm surprised that they didn't put that on quieter months for them. Do it during the fall or the spring.
Yeah, me too. I mean, maybe it's something to do with the weather and having to do
The construction.
big construction. Yeah, so obviously I have no idea. But it does seem like if I was looking at a chart of their busiest months, I would imagine that the summer is, I mean, it's always packed in there.
Oh,
days.
yeah. I wonder what happens to the docents and staff workers who man the museum.
That's a good question. That should be a recalculating. We should look into that.
Absolutely. All right. Sure. We'll call one up.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to head there next week, and I have a friend my friend Mariana, hi Mariana, who works there and is gonna answer a couple questions for me about the shutdown. So I will ask that. What happens to all the folks who work here? Do they? I guess they just go on like unemployment for a couple months or something.
I think that you offered a very valuable piece of advice for those who will be traveling to New York throughout the summer. I think the Whitney could scratch the same itch.
Yeah, the Whitney has a terrific collection, a permanent collection of American art, and the building itself is incredible and showcases all of New York City as part of its collection, really. Because you kind of wind outside as you go upstairs. It's really a cool experience. A lot of great pictures. Yeah, the Whitney I would highly recommend.
And frankly, the Met Museum, while not known for its modern art collection, has really, really been trying to move in that direction over the last couple of years. And so they, too, have quite an impressive library of modern art. So I would encourage you to go just up the road from MoMA, specifically to those modern art galleries.
And another good museum that you can see with a good collection of modern and contemporary art is the Met Brower, which is up close by the Met, just a few blocks away, and usually there's a lot fewer people there. It's a lot easier to get into. You don't have to wait in long lines, and there's always some interesting things to see.
Yeah, and that's their more modern outpost, and it's actually in the building that used to house the old Whitney.
Yeah.
So you can follow the old Whitney and then go down to the new Whitney and compare. Quite different. One is very brutalist and feels very much of a time cement building to today's more modern, beautiful, big windows, open gallery at the new Whitney.
Right, and the Met Brower used to be the Whitney. So all these, there's a game of like
it's full. There's like 3 buildings, and all museums just
Occupy
rotate through
Yeah.
them.
So what's your last stop this week?
So my last stop is also museum related, as it happens. It's a Boston museum called the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Do you know that museum?
I do. It's really magical. One of my favorite kinds of museums are when just incredibly rich people build a big house and
Yeah.
turn it into a museum, and that is what you've got there.
So I think that we've mentioned it before. To me, it's comparable to, if you know, Philadelphia's Barnes collection.
Right.
As you say, it's an old mansion that a wealthy person filled with art, arranged the art exactly as she wished it to be viewed. And at some time, I would love to talk more deeply about who Isabella Stewart Gardner is, because she's a fascinating, enterprising person. But what I'm specifically referring to is a podcast that I'd like to recommend. It's out of the Boston Globe, and it's called Last Scene, SEEN, Last Scene. And it's all about the biggest unsolved art heist in history, which is the robbing of 13 artworks out of the Gardner Museum.
And this is sort of like something out of Ocean's 11 or something, right? 'Cause
That's a great comparison. Yeah, it's $500 million worth of art across 13 pieces, and 11 of them are sort of classic paintings from a range of all painters you would know, a Vermeer, a Rembrandt, a Manet, a Degas. I mean, these folks knew exactly what they were going after. But then what the podcast investigates is some of the clues as to who might be behind this, and two of those clues are the lesser known works that were stolen. One was an ancient Chinese beaker, and one was a sort of French eagle finial sculpture. And they so don't fit within the range of all the quite famous works that were stolen. And over the course of 9 episodes, Last Scene investigates all the personalities that are tied to this. It questions whether this might have been an inside job. It takes you through the kind of minute by minute analysis of how it was pulled off. And, there's a lot of fascinating details that those true crime lovers will absolutely want to dig into. And I'll tell you, at the end, it's there are some great contenders for who might have done this, but the mystery remains unsolved. The FBI still is researching this.
And so none of these works of art have emerged on the market that we know of. They've just totally vanished.
No, right. They were stolen in 1990. So you would have thought that maybe we would have seen one of these works. And there are people in the podcast who report having seen it in different places. But what it really comes down to, and what I learned was, those who decide to steal art may not realize how hard it is to then turn around and offload that art, because then you are inherently putting out there that you had access and may know where it came from. So you are going to be implicated in this crime in some way. And the podcast does a great job of tracking down a huge cast of characters who may know, some who claim that they've seen it. And, it also brings on a lot of eccentric treasure hunters who feel that they know where these works are. And I'll tell you, some of the theories are harebrained, very entertaining, quite out there. The one that I knew before I even listened to the podcast was that it may be that the paintings were cemented over into the bottom of a gangster's swimming pool. So how you get from Boston to a gangster swimming pool is the journey you will take on Last Scene.
I mean, knowing Boston like I do, that seems like a pretty short journey, right? I mean, Boston has had its share of gangsters.
Yeah, it's not terribly prevalent these days, though. But yeah, fair point. It does bring you back. It also does transport you back to that time where, especially the Irish mafia. I mean, everyone knows the name Whitey Bulger.
Sure.
When that mafia was highly active in Boston, and living here, I can say I don't feel that these days, but it does bring you back. And so the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, you desperately want to go after you listen to this podcast. So it's true crime. It scratches that museum itch. I love it and highly recommend.
Great. That I love true crime podcasts, so I will be giving that a listen.
I was actually thinking maybe we should fake murder one of each other, and then the other could carry on this podcast as a true crime.
There's definitely an audience for that. Like,
Though
sort of travel true crime crossover.
Though I guess I've just revealed that whichever one of us survives is the murderer. So
we can edit that out.
Yeah. I'll take it out. It out. So Ryan, what are we talking about next week on our 21st episode?
Well, we are turning 21, so what better to talk about on your 21st than some of the best breweries and distilleries that you can tour, that we've toured before.
Absolutely. And, I don't want to do a spoiler, but Guinness will certainly be talked about.
Yes, I think that's the one that both of us have been to. I will not be drinking a Guinness while we record because I think Guinness is pretty gross, but I will pop open a nice glass of natural wine and...
All right. Well, it's fair to say then that there will be a debate over how good Guinness is, because I will actually drink a Guinness. So raise a glass and join us next week for episode 21, the best distilleries and breweries that you can visit.
Until next time, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
People love my outros, don't they?
Glug, 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 glug.